If you were standing at the front of a high school classroom right now, scanning the rows of students on a typical August morning,
Right. First week of school.
yeah, exactly, and you were staring at a profoundly sleep-deprived teenager sitting right next to a teenager with, like, actual neurodevelopmental ADHD,
Yeah.
I, you, you probably couldn't tell the difference.
Not at all.
I mean, they look completely identical, and that identical surface presentation
Hmm.
is, it's currently quietly breaking our school systems from the inside out.
It really is. It is a massive diagnostic blind spot. I mean, we are treating a biological scheduling problem as a permanent neurodevelopmental disorder.
Yeah.
And the fallout from that is just staggering for everyone involved.
Which brings us to our mission for you today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are untangling this massive back-to-school behavioral mystery. We're looking at an incredibly insightful brief on the biology of resetting school year sleep schedules, alongside a fascinating profile of a systemic mental health solution currently rolling out to solve this exact crisis in schools.
It's an important one. Understanding how a biological mismatch creates a systemic bottleneck. It's essential for anyone interested in psychology or parenting or just how education systems function.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when I first read that a tired kid and an ADHD kid looked the same to a trained educator, I have to admit I was pretty skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an exaggeration, right?
Right.
But it is deeply grounded in cognitive science.
Well, wait, I have a hard time believing that experienced teachers or, school psychologists genuinely can't spot a tired kid. Doesn't sleep deprivation just look like a kid yawning, putting their head on the desk, maybe rubbing their
You
eyes?
think so?
Yeah, that seems miles away from a complex disorder.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the overlap isn't superficial fatigue. We aren't just talking about a kid looking sleepy.
Okay.
We're talking about a fundamental breakdown in cognitive processing. When a teenager is chronically sleep deprived, their prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain directly behind the forehead.
Right, the part that handles decision-making.
Exactly. Executive function, emotional regulation, attention, that area becomes severely compromised. Insufficient sleep actively produces the exact same working memory deficits that drive an ADHD referral.
So they are literally losing the ability to hold on to information in real time.
Exactly that. Just imagine a teacher giving a 3-part instruction for a geometry assignment.
Okay.
A severely underslept teenager's brain drops the second and third steps before they even pick up their pencil.
Wow.
Yeah, so to the teacher, that student looks off task, completely distracted, and failing to complete work they are absolutely intellectually capable of doing.
Because they literally just lost the instruction.
Right, and then combine that with the fact that an exhausted brain struggles to regulate emotion, so the student snaps at a peer or, gets abnormally irritable over a minor frustration.
And suddenly, that behavioral profile maps flawlessly onto the standard diagnostic criteria.
Flawless. I mean, if you open up the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
The big guidebook for psychiatrists.
Right, the big one. The criteria for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder include things like failing to give close attention to details, not following through on instructions, and difficulty organizing tasks. The presentation of a chronic sleep deficit mimics this to the letter.
Man, this feels like taking your car to the mechanic for a full, extensive engine rebuild when it's actually just completely out of gas.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You're looking at a symptom, the car won't go, and applying the most extreme permanent diagnosis to it.
Yeah. And this diagnostic confusion peaks every single year in late August and early September because of a phenomenon researchers call the summer drift.
Summer drift.
Huh.
Okay, so if the symptoms look identical to the teachers in the room, we have to look under the hood at what's actually causing them. Why is a teenager's brain doing this in August but not in May?
Well, over the summer, without the anchor of a morning school bell, a teenager's sleep schedule naturally drifts about 2 or 3 hours later.
Yeah.
They start going to bed at midnight or 1:00 a.m. and waking up at 10 or 11:00 a.m. And when August rolls around, that schedule just never gets reset before the first day of class.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the source material makes a point to emphasize that this isn't just kids being stubborn or playing video games all night.
No, not at all.
Adolescent biology makes this shift incredibly difficult to fight. When kids hit puberty, their internal circadian clock actually physically shifts later. It is a biological reality. A 16-year-old may genuinely physically not feel sleepy at 10:00 p.m., because their brain hasn't even begun to release the melatonin required to initiate sleep.
Right. They are essentially experiencing severe jet lag without ever getting on an airplane.
That's wild.
Yeah, their internal biological clock is operating in the Pacific time zone, but their physical body is sitting in a classroom in the Eastern time zone.
But the municipality's school bus schedule doesn't care about their delayed melatonin release.
Definitely not.
That yellow bus is still rolling up to their corner at 6:45 a.m., whether their brain thinks it's the middle of the night or not. I mean, it is hardwired human biology
Yeah.
fighting a municipal transportation schedule.
Which is precisely why adults need to pause before making assumptions about a student's intent. When you see a student in the first week of September suddenly being lazy or snapping at you or staring blankly at an assignment, the baseline assumption should be that they are drastically underslept.
Absolutely.
We are incredibly quick as a society to label a biological mismatch as a character flaw.
Yes, we immediately say, oh, they don't care about their grades or, they're being rebellious this year, but they're just biologically stranded in the wrong time zone.
Exactly.
And if we know this is a biological clock issue, that means we can't just yell at a teenager to go to sleep. You can't command a biological system to comply through willpower. We need a biological intervention.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the August reset protocol outlined in our sources.
Because resetting a teenager's circadian rhythm requires specific environmental cues, not just strict rules. You are essentially hacking the brain's clock.
Okay, so the text lays out a very specific 4-step protocol, and it highlights that this needs to start a week or two before the first bell. You absolutely cannot do this the Sunday night before school starts.
No, it won't work.
Right. So the first step is to move the wake time earlier in 15 to 20-minute steps, not all at once. Second, get bright light in their eyes within an hour of waking up. Third, dim screens and overhead lights in the last hour of the evening. And fourth, keep weekend wake times within about an hour of the school day wake times.
Those 4 steps sound simple, but mechanically they're doing some very heavy lifting in the brain.
Well, I have to admit something here. When I read this protocol, I realized my own logic has been completely backwards for years.
Really? How so?
Whenever I need to shift my own schedule, or like if I were trying to fix a kid's sleep schedule for school, my instinct is always to force an earlier bedtime. I say, okay, the summer is over. You have to be in bed by 9:00 p.m. tonight.
Yeah, that's what most people do.
But this source explicitly emphasizes shifting the wake time instead. Why is the wake time the primary lever we're supposed to pull?
Well, it's the core scientific takeaway of the entire brief. Wake time anchors the circadian clock infinitely better than bedtime does because of how our brains process light and sleep pressure.
Okay.
Think about the mechanics of sleep. You cannot force yourself to fall asleep. If your biological clock says it's 6:00 p.m. biologically, lying in a dark room at 9:00 p.m. is just going to cause frustration.
Yeah.
Tossing and turning, anxiety.
Right, you're just staring at the ceiling, getting mad at yourself.
Exactly. However, you can force yourself to wake up. It won't be pleasant, but an alarm clock can physically get you out of bed.
True.
And when you wake up and immediately expose your eyes to bright light, specifically sunlight, you send a powerful, unignorable biological signal to a tiny region in the brain.
Which region?
It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
The suprachiasmatic nucleus.
Yes. It sits right above where your optic nerves cross. It is essentially the brain's master biological clock. When those high lux levels of morning light hit your retina, that master clock stops any lingering melatonin production dead in its tracks.
Oh, wow.
And more importantly, it starts a biological countdown timer. It tells the brain, this is morning. In exactly 14 to 16 hours, you need to initiate a massive wave of sleep pressure.
So you were basically setting a trap for yourself to be tired later.
You are. By shifting the wake time earlier by just 15 or 20 minutes a day on a Tuesday and combining it with that morning light exposure, you are physically dragging the internal clock backward.
That is so smart.
And then at night, by dimming the lights and keeping away from screens, you are just getting out of the way. You are removing the artificial blue light that tricks the brain into thinking the sun is still up, which would otherwise delay the melatonin production you just worked so hard to time perfectly.
You're working with the biology rather than just demanding it behave differently.
Right.
But this also shows why you can't do it all at once. If you let a kid sleep until 11 a.m. all summer, and then suddenly wake them up at 6 a.m. for the first day of school, you haven't shifted their clock. You've just brutally interrupted their biological night.
Exactly. And if families aren't aware of this biological reality and they don't implement this incremental reset protocol in August, the problem doesn't just stay a grumpy morning in the kitchen.
Right.
It cascades into a massive administrative and financial crisis for the school districts.
Because of that overlap we talked about at the beginning,
Yeah.
all those exhausted, irritable, forgetful kids show up in September, and to the teachers, they look exactly like they have ADHD. And the text points out that this wave of misattributed ADHD referrals completely consumes vital evaluation capacity at the district level.
Yeah, school psychologists are a highly finite resource. A comprehensive neurodevelopmental evaluation for ADHD takes hours of observation, testing, scoring, meetings.
It's a huge process.
It is. So if a school psychologist gets hit with 50 referrals in September and 40 of them are just kids suffering from the summer drift, the system breaks.
Leaving the 10 students who actually have profound neurodevelopmental needs waiting in a massive backlog, sometimes for months, just to get the accommodations they desperately need.
Which is why the source suggests a really strict structural protocol for schools to adopt. They argue that schools should establish a 2-week corrected sleep schedule as a mandatory precondition for an ADHD referral in ambiguous cases.
Basically, force a diagnostic filter.
Precisely. If a teacher flags a student for inattention and irritability in September, before the school authorizes a full, expensive psychological workup, the family and the school work together to enforce a genuinely corrected sleep schedule for 14 days.
Fix the sleep first.
Fix the sleep first. If the sleep is fixed and the severe executive function deficits disappear, you just saved the district hours of wasted administrative time and saved the kid from a misdiagnosis. Only symptoms that persist after 2 weeks of genuinely corrected sleep warrant a full assessment.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the immense financial and time burden on schools, the text offers a brilliant administrative tip. It argues that it is vastly cheaper and, a much more defensible use of staff time to run a massive sleep reset communication campaign for families in early August than to try and process the tsunami of false referrals that follow if you don't.
It's just good math.
Right. Send out the emails, hold the webinars, teach families the 15-minute wait time trick and the morning light science. Get ahead of the biology.
This raises an important question, though. Because as brilliant as that administrative tip is on paper, we know the reality of modern education.
Yeah, we do.
How do schools actually manage these overwhelming behavioral demands, run these family campaigns, and handle the kids who are in genuine crisis when the resources are already stretched so incredibly thin? It's very easy for a white paper to say, oh, run a campaign or establish a 2-week sleep protocol. But on the ground, someone actually has to monitor that, communicate effectively with the families, and manage the student who is having a meltdown in the hallway right now.
And most of the time, that burden falls on an already overworked teacher who is suddenly forced to act as an unlicensed therapist, which means to actually manage these overlapping issues, like differentiating a sleep crisis from an ADHD diagnosis, communicating with stressed families, supporting the staff schools require robust, dedicated infrastructure.
They absolutely do.
And this leads us directly to our second source, which profiles how districts in Georgia are tackling this exact systemic bottleneck through an infrastructure program called MentalSpace School.
This model is fascinating because it stops treating mental health and behavioral intervention as an afterthought and starts treating it as core school infrastructure.
It really does. MentalSpace School is providing Georgia K-12 districts with dedicated teletherapy teams assigned directly per school. We aren't talking about the old model of having one overwhelmed guidance counselor trying to manage a caseload of 1,000 kids.
No, that never works.
Right. We're talking about providing the school with immediate same-day access to licensed therapy, crisis intervention, suicide, and violence prevention. And the part that really caught my eye in their service list, they include staff wellness and direct family counseling.
That holistic approach is the only way to actually solve the bottleneck. You cannot fix a student's behavioral environment if you aren't supporting the family system and the teachers who shape that environment every single day.
Yeah. And they've built the administrative side of this to completely remove the friction that usually stops families from getting help. According to the profile, they integrate directly with state Medicaid and all the major commercial insurers like BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, Peach State. But they structure it so that Medicaid copays for this service are $0.
Wow. By completely removing the financial barrier for families, particularly those relying on Medicaid. They've taken early intervention, which is usually a luxury reserved for families who can afford private, out-of-network therapists, and turned it into a standard, accessible utility for the entire school population.
And it is fully HIPAA and FERPA compliant. For anyone not deep in the education acronyms, HIPAA protects a patient's medical privacy, and FERPA is the federal law that protects the privacy of student educational records.
Crucial for schools.
Definitely. So the therapy is locked down, private, and secure, even though it's facilitated through the school. But there is a highly timely detail in this source that we absolutely have to point out for any scrambling administrators who might be listening to us right now. MentalSpace School provides direct compliance support for HB 268.
That is a critical detail based on the current calendar.
Right, so for context, HB 268 is legislation mandating that schools provide specific mental health resources and safety protocols. Now, the deadline for schools to be fully compliant with HB 268 was July 2026. Given that today is August 7th, 2026, that deadline literally just passed a few weeks ago.
Talk about stressful.
Seriously. So if there are districts waking up in a cold sweat realizing they are suddenly out of compliance, this plug-and-play teletherapy model acts as an immediate safety net.
Legislation often mandates broad support requirements for schools without providing the immediate physical infrastructure to actually deliver it on the ground. A comprehensive teletherapy model like this solves a massive compliance headache overnight.
But beyond the compliance, the thing that absolutely blew me away were the real-world outcomes listed in the text. They report an 89% improved attendance rate across their programs and a staggering 92% reduced anxiety metric. 92%.
That is massive.
Plus an 85% family satisfaction rate. When I see that family counseling is integrated into this, it perfectly addresses the ecosystem needed to implement things like that sleep reset protocol we were just talking about.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can clearly see how these two different sources talk to each other. You cannot ask a family to completely restructure their chaotic morning routine, track 15-minute wake time increments, and monitor morning light exposure if that family is currently in a state of emotional or financial crisis.
Exactly.
They need support first.
Right. Survival mode doesn't leave room for circadian rhythm hacking.
Exactly. But when a school has access to immediate same-day teletherapy, and when they can bring the family directly into the counseling process through a zero copay system, the school suddenly has the actual capacity to effectively triage.
They can finally figure out what's really going on under the hood of the broken engine.
Yes. When that high school student presents with severe irritability and inattention in late August, the school isn't forced to just dump them into an endless months-long ADHD evaluation queue. The dedicated MentalSpace therapy team can look at the situation, consult with the family in real time, and determine the root cause.
Right.
Does the student just need a biological sleep intervention because of the summer drift? Are they experiencing a distinct mental health crisis at home that needs immediate stabilization? Or is this a true underlying neurodevelopmental issue requiring a full evaluation? It ensures the right resources go to the right child at the exact right time.
It clears the systemic bottleneck by applying precision. So just to recap the journey we've been on with you today, we started by looking at a grumpy, inattentive teenager at 7 a.m. We uncovered the underlying biological circadian shift that actually caused that presentation and learned how the 15-minute wake time trick and morning sunlight can reset that biological clock. And then we zoomed way out to see how massive systemic safety nets, like the teletherapy infrastructure provided by MentalSpace School, are required to keep the whole educational ecosystem functioning and ensure we aren't misdiagnosing kids simply because we lack the resources to look deeper.
And for you listening, whether you are a parent trying to prep your household for the incoming school year, an educator trying to hold a chaotic classroom together, or just someone fascinated by how complex human systems operate, the core takeaway here is vital. Understanding the true root cause of a problem, like distinguishing between a biological sleep deficit and a neurodevelopmental disorder like ADHD, saves incredible amounts of time, it saves the system money, and most importantly, it saves families massive amounts of emotional energy.
It stops us from paying for an engine rebuild when we just need to put a little gas in the tank. Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought I want you to mull over as you go about your day. Today, we've talked exclusively about teenagers, biology, and school systems. But if something as simple as a 2-hour sleep drift can perfectly mimic a complex neurodevelopmental disorder like ADHD in adolescence, wait, actually, think about this. What other easily fixable environmental factors might we be misdiagnosing as permanent personality flaws or performance issues in adults in our own workplaces?
That is a phenomenal question to leave things on. Context really is everything.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We always love unpacking these mysteries with you. Until next time.